Welcome to the Danger Close podcast. Thank you for tuning in to this special series on the 1983 Beirut Marine barracks bombing to complement my first work of nonfiction, titled Targeted Beirut, the 1983 Marine barracks bombing and the untold origin story of the War on Terror, written with military historian and Pulitzer Prize finalist James Scott. It hits shelves on September 24th and is available for pre-order now in hardcover, ebook, and audiobook, narrated by Ray Porter. James Scott joins me to co-host this podcast series. Our guest today is Don Howell. In October of 1983, Don was a young Navy corpsman deployed to Beirut. The night before the bombing, the last thing he did before he fell asleep was say the Lord's Prayer. In the middle of the night, after an alert, he transferred to the basement of the Marine headquarters and barracks building and found a cot to crash out on. Early the next morning, the building came down on top of him in an attack that proved to be one of the largest non-nuclear explosions in history and resulted in the greatest single-day loss of life for the United States Marine Corps since the Battle of Iwo Jima in World War II. It claimed the lives of 220 Marines, 18 sailors, and 3 soldiers. This is his story. Navy Corpsman Don Howell struggled just to breathe, choking on the thick dust in the basement of the destroyed building. The darkness robbed the 21-year-old of a view of his surroundings, but he could hear the muffled voices of others trapped in the wreckage around him, letting him know he was not alone. "What the hell happened?" one Marine hollered. "Where the fuck am I?" "You're in the basement," Howell replied. "What?" came a stunned answer. "Where were you?" Howell shouted. "On the 4th fucking deck." That Marine had fallen the equivalent of 5 stories, yet miraculously survived. Howell's eye hurt from his injury, prompting him to strip off his t-shirt and press it against his battered face. The last words the corpsman spoke before he drifted off to sleep the night before were the Lord's Prayer. Howell closed his eyes again in grace.
Now I want to kick it off on your path into the military. What was that path like and that decision process like?
Well, it's interesting. My dad was a hospital corpsman in the Navy, and he served in Vietnam War 2 tours with the Marines as well. And that, not to say that was on my mind when I joined the military, but I knew that he was a corpsman, and I was always around the military family in military housing, et cetera. So when it was time for me to join the military, I was living in a very, very, very modest. Well, actually, we were just flat poor, and I knew I wanted to get out of that type of a situation. Although I was a good student in high school, college was never discussed. So I had absolutely no idea on how to get in or what to do, et cetera. So at the age of 17, my 11th grade year, took the ASVAB test, did pretty well, and I just went ahead and joined because I was able to sign for myself. And about a month or 2 after I graduated high school, I was gone. And it was really more out of desperation to get out of that living situation. But yet and still, I was more familiar with it simply because, I grew up in a military family. So.
And where was boot camp for you?
Boot camp was in San Diego, California.
Right.
And that's kind of funny because I actually went back. I was a West Coast kid before coming to South Carolina. And I actually went back to San Diego for boot camp, which was great. I was excited about that. And, the surf, the sun, everyone was talking like me instead of the people in the South. and that was good. Boot camp was easy. I felt I was an athlete in high school, so that was easy. The academics was relatively easy. I graduated I think I was number 3 in my class. And of course, that set me up for Hospital Corps School, which was also in San Diego. And I did really well there. I think I was also number 3 in that class.
Nice. What year was it?
That was 1980. 1980. Yeah, 1980.
Okay. Where was your first duty station?
My first duty station was right back here in Charleston.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, it was walking distance from the projects in which I lived in.
Wow.
So I was able to stay at home and I was able to walk back and forth to work, which was great because, of course, at that age, no one has a car. And so I was able to walk back and forth and stay at home while everyone else was staying in the barracks. But I think I was shortchanged. I should have stayed in the barracks. That was a party.
Yeah. So what were you doing then up until you deployed to Lebanon?
Yeah. So I did a year and a half in at the Navy Hospital in Charleston. Started off in the pediatrics ward, and then went to the ICU. That was my first taste of the ICU. And at that age, the age of 19, I was defibrillating, starting IVs, the whole nine, and my after that, I guess I was doing so well that they moved me to the med surge floor and made me senior corpsman. So I was in charge of all the corpsmen. And then after my time was up there, off to Camp Lejeune I went. And, all the guys were saying, man, if you go into Camp Lejeune, you're going to need a car, man. So that was my priority, getting a car. And boy, am I glad I did that, because it was like 5 miles between our barracks and the front gate. So, but, and that was eye-opening to be in a Marine Corps base for the very first time. They're the way they do things, the way they pursue the military was, they're very gungy, and so they're all about snapping and popping.
And what year did you get to Lejeune?
Excuse me?
When do you get to Lejeune?
I got to Lejeune in 81. I think it was in the summer of 81. I went to FMF school. Then after that, after I finished FMF school.
How'd you like that?
Excuse me?
How'd you like that?
It wasn't bad. It wasn't bad at all. Easy. The physical fitness part was easy. And the academics, I kind of understood it because I was working with med surge. I had a lot of experience in the ICU. The only translation that I had to make was from the battlefield from garrison to battlefield medicine. So, and that wasn't difficult at all. And then afterwards, I went to 1st Battalion, 6th Marines. Never had a chance to deploy, but we did a lot of training. And I got into a little tit for tat with my first class when I was in 1-6. And that's how I ended up in 1-8.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Really? So if that hadn't happened, you wouldn't have been there?
I probably would have been there, because they were just starting using computers for the very first time, and I was the only guy that was entering all the medical records onto the computer. So, and even when the Marines had to go on like McCrest tests and so forth, they deployed to do winter training, and I stayed back because I had to enter all the medical records on the computer. So I was kind of integral to the operations of the BAS, but that little spat that I had with the first class ended that that stay.
Wow!
I ended up going straight over into 1st Battalion, 8th Marines.
And when'd you get when'd you get there?
I believe I got there also in 80. I think it was early 82, I would say. Okay. Early 82 that I got there. But I was actually there for about a year before we ever deployed.
Yeah.
So I actually got to meet the guys and built a good relationship with them. And I didn't have any more problems in the BAS. So, but little did I know that they were gearing up to go to Beirut.
Yeah.
I just thought they just got rid of me out at 1-6 because they were sick and tired of me. But they were actually, trying to build up to get to TO. So I guess my chief at 1-6 was like, "Yeah, I got the perfect candidate for you."
A volunteer.
Yeah.
And so when did you find out that you're going to be going to Lebanon?
We found out, I would say in the spring or late winter of 83. And at that point, the situation at the American Embassy in Beirut was on the news, et cetera. And it was around that time, I would say around February, March timeframe, they announced it saying that we were going to Beirut. And from that point, we started gearing up, getting all our gear together, having inspections to make sure we had everything, our personal gear together. And then afterwards, they let us go for leave for 30 days. And then we came back and off we went to Beirut. And that was around May of 83 that we went to Beirut.
Were they talking about the mission already as being a peacekeeping force? Was that from the outset?
Well, from the outset, yes, that was interesting. They first gave us these rules of engagement cards, which basically tied our hands behind our backs. You know, on these cards, it said that we could not put rounds in our weapons. It said that for the most part, you know, because as you know, the Marines, they're built to fight, and it was just the antithesis of that. And even while we were in Beirut, while we were receiving rocket fire, we always, because of our rules of engagement, we had to call back to Washington, D.C. to see if we could fire back or defend ourselves. And, you know, despite the fact that, they had these rules of engagements on the base, a lot of Marines and so forth, they were really frustrated at that, but I guess they had no other choice as peacekeepers. And we were told we were being peacekeepers, and I guess that's probably try to pacify us. But yet and still, we were seeing a lot of conflict brewing, and then the explosion at the American embassy, et cetera. So we knew that it wasn't just a peacekeeping mission,
And Don, tell us a little bit about like what it was like when you first got there. Because I mean, this is sort of you landed in Beirut. What's it look like? What's it smell like? What's the vibe of the place at that point?
All right. So we were on a ship, and it took us several weeks to get there. And the night before we actually pulled in to port, or they were telling us on the 1MC on the ship that we were going to be there by the time that we woke up in the morning. So the morning came, I put my camis on, et cetera, and I walked outside the ship to look at Beirut for the very first time. And you saw this haze, which clearly it was, smoke from rocket fire or what have you, just blanketed the city. And at a distance, you just heard this boom, 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 boom all the time. And at that moment, I had this feeling of gloom and doom. And the first words that came out of my mouth was, "I'm not dying here." That was the first thing that came out of my mouth. And that was the first impression I had of Beirut. It wasn't going to be a real nice place. It wasn't going to be a picnic. And we were kind of expecting that because the group that were there before us, they were able to go out in town, hit the clubs, meet the girls, we're all 20, 21. We were all about that. But as soon as we got to the base and we stormed the beach per se, and they escorted us to the Marine Corps barracks, and that's where we stayed. The only people that was able to go out in town was the guys who went on patrol. So, and I volunteered for that a couple of times, but they wouldn't let me go. They're probably saying he's a runner. But anyway, then my first impression of Beirut was pretty dismal. You just felt it was palpable that everything that we trained for and everything they discussed with us wasn't quite meeting the visual, the optics that we first saw when we got there. And I guess the rest had to have been learned while on the ground, so.
You were coming in as a corpsman on that. So tell us a little bit about like what were you doing day in and day out? Because you worked out of the BLT building. So and that's for listeners, that's the battalion landing team headquarters. It's the 4-story building that's ultimately targeted by Hezbollah. And so tell us a little bit about like what were you guys doing day in and day out there?
Well, from day to day, okay, our first thing that we had to do once we got to the building was we had to build our battalion aid station. So we had one on the 4th floor. And I guess that's probably where it was from the beginning, but from the previous group. But from day to day, it was a simple cuts and bruises, Marines getting bored and they're sharpening their knives and then they're testing it across their knee. And we have one particular Marine who chose Marines can sharpen a hell of a knife. They can sharpen great knives. So what he did was they would want to test it. Take a piece of paper and slice it to see how sharp it was. But I guess he didn't have that at the time. So he literally ran the blade lightly across his knee and ended up lacerating his anterior bursula, which, it lubricates the knee. So he's going to have like arthritis for the rest of his life. But we had to sew that up, of course, and we gave him antibiotics. And, and we had a couple of beds in the BAS, so he stayed there for a couple of days. But one of the main things that we treated in Beirut above everything else was Shigella, because there's so many filth flies. As a matter of fact, we had a raw sewage area that ran directly through our base. And it was a distance away, but it drew a lot of flies. And then, of course, it landed on our food. And a lot of times these guys were coming back, with, diarrhea and emesis, vomiting all the time. So a lot of the guys spent their time in our BAS and our makeshift hospital bed, puking and pooping.
Yeah. That little river by y'all's base had a little name to it too, didn't it?
We called it Shit River.
We talked to Randy Gatto, who led the press around, and a reporter fell in that river one time. So, it's great.
Fact, his name was Cerniglia. He was a Marine. And I hope that he hears this podcast, because I would love to talk to him. He was a real tall guy. And I knew that, his name was always stuck in my mind, Cerniglia, because I was always thinking about Caligula, right? But anyway, he came to the BAS soaking wet, head to toe. And I'm like, what are you coming here for? He said, man, I fell in the shit river. And I was like, first thing I said to him, did you swallow it?
That's brutal. Brutal.
And sure enough, he was puking and pooping within about a day. And he stayed there for about 4 or 5 days. So we had to give him, we were giving guys a lot of IV fluids. It was really hot there. So dehydration was another issue. And then, of course, just a change of climate. It was really dusty there. So we dealt with a lot of nasal, hay fever like symptoms, et cetera, So that was the thing that we were dealing with from day to day. Basically, the fallout from Shit River and basically the Marines just hurt themselves. They would go out on a Sunday. We had the concertina wire that cut the parking lot in half. On our side, on a Sunday, we play football. On the opposite side of the concertina wire were the Lebanese girls. They were literally lining the concertina wire to watch us play football. And the Marines being a Marine, they have to take off their shirts. So one particular case, a Marine came to the BAS, sliced up. And I was like, what happened? Well, I was out there playing football, and I told him to throw a pass next to the concertina wire so the girls could see me. And he runs right to the concertina wire and slices himself up.
Oh, man.
Yeah, that was a...
Guys are idiots, aren't we?
There's no getting around that. Oh, man.
The hormones.
And what are you seeing over that as the spring turns to summer and you get later into summer and shelling increases and you start taking casualties? What is that situation like? What are you thinking about as that?
That was really surreal for us because, when you're, and I'm sure this is probably the same for any combatant that goes to any war, that goes to war for the first time, you never really know what it's like until you get your first casualty. And that's when reality sets in. We received a lot of training prior to that, but no real true application. So as the summer progressed and, the rocket fire became more prevalent around town, and eventually started looping it in on our base. And at that point, we'd already known where we was going to go in case of rocket fire. We had, conditions 1 through 4, needless to say. Condition 1 was, you basically in your foxholes. Condition 4 was most relaxed. So I'm hoping I'm getting that right. But either way, we started beginning to run through those conditions on a serious note because we were getting rocket fire. And we'd gone through that for maybe like a month. And then after about a month, we heard we had our first casualty. A rocket had gone off near a Marine. And as a matter of fact, that Marine was a friend of mine. And they were saying that he was coming in. I right now his name escapes me. He's a Puerto Rican from New York. Anyway, they were saying that he was coming in. And, of course, we had to hustle and prepare the BAS for casualties. So, we're pulling out the IV fluid. We were setting up more cots, et cetera, for casualties. And we were assigning 1 or 2 corpsmen to each cot, to take care of the casualties. And we were standing by at the ready. And they brought our first patient in, the Puerto Rican gentleman I was talking to you about, and he was like this big. And he was wrapped up in a poncho liner. And I was like, is this so-and-so? He said, yeah, man. And the Marine had said, yeah, man, a mortar went off right next to him. This is all we could bring of him because the rocket fire was so heavy. And he was like, man, we have to bring the rest of them tomorrow. And I guess that's probably when reality really set in, because these are the guys that you hang out with, had beers with, talk about girls with. And then all of a sudden he's coming back in pieces. And that was my first exposure to the casualties. A lot of the other Marines may have gotten hurt and they may have gone directly to the ship. There was a few cases that way, but for the most part, they always came to the BAS. But that's what would happen. And that particular night, we received a number of Marines. There was another Marine that came in. His M16 had been sliced in half by shrapnel, and he was still carrying that M16. He would not let it go. But
was that Alex Ortega?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he and George Losey were the first 2 killed, and they were killed that same day.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, but that was that was my first exposure to the casualties. And then later on, as the summer progressed, the Marines were they're frazzled. They were just worn out, because it got to Alpha Company was just getting hammered. And the chief had said to me, hey, we need to give, one of the corpsmen a break. And it was the middle of a firefight. And they was going to send me out there to take his place and bring him back. And that was probably the most scared I was, because I knew that it was just an ugly situation. And then I was questioning myself, of course, because, I can do battlefield medicine, but I never really did it in actuality. So I was just kind of questioning myself, like, can I do this and so forth? And it was just kind of harrowing. But fortunately, at that time, they said, okay, we called it off. You don't have to go, Howell. You can stay. I said, okay, fine. I was happy to stay. But yeah, that's how, as the summer progressed, just the situation just got worse.
Don, I was going to jump in on that. I mean, how are the Marines taking this at this point? I mean, what are you seeing morale-wise going on? Because, Alex and George Losey are the first 2, but they're going to be the first 2 of 6 guys as the situation deteriorates there. I mean, how is it, how's that affecting morale for everybody at that point?
The set of Marines came in, one was dead, needless to say. And, word like that travels like wildfire throughout with the Marines. And it's kind of funny because, we're locked into this BAS for a long period of time, and you're busy dealing with the casualties. And then when you're done with the final casualty and you literally walked out of the BAS to probably have a cigarette just to kind of decompress, you just seem to be, these Marines are just staring at you as you walk out, wanting to know, who was it? Did he make it? And it was at that point that I realized the fluctuation of the morale. We were, high and mighty when we first got there. And, there was the rocket fire that was going on perpetually throughout the town. It was a bit of a wake up call, but we were still quite motivated. But once we started receiving the casualties, then the chatter started. And then the paranoia started. We had a corpsman, Marion Keys, and Jimmy Kane. They were, stand-up guys, motivated, but as time went on, they started getting really doubtful, and then they began to get paranoid. And they was giving these predictions, man, we're not going to make it, this and that, and so forth, and blah, blah, blah. And then you begin to see that a lot of Marines are beginning to say that, and I even got to the point that I wrote to my mother and I told her, Mom, I don't think I'm going to make it. So it was, morale went down pretty quickly, and then of course, it was even worse when we started receiving rounds directly at the headquarters base. And we knew we couldn't fire back. And that's when the Marines really started getting irate, cussing up a storm, saying this is bullshit, and because we were, sometimes you're in your foxhole or the BAS, you're there for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours. And then you see this constant stream of injuries coming in, some minor, some major, and the Marines are hearing it. They know these guys. They're talking on the radio to the radio men. These radio men are talking to the radio men and comms in the headquarters, and they're already telling these guys names. So they really know about these guys, these Marines, injured Marines, before we do. So it was very prevalent as to the goings on of these Marines in actual time. The word got around quick.
Yeah. And shifting gears a little bit, you had a buddy over there, Bryan Earle.
Right.
Tell us about Bryan.
Bryan was an interesting guy. He was a real cerebral dude. He didn't talk a whole lot. But needless to say, he had left his previous unit, who came back to Beirut. They came back from Beirut to Camp Lejeune. He cross-decked, which means he went from one unit directly to our unit to go back to Beirut. And we knew that he was there to marry. He wanted to go back to Beirut to marry a girl that he had met there. And she happened to be an interpreter, a Lebanese woman. So we didn't really get an opportunity to train a lot with him. We didn't get a lot of opportunity to get to know him like everyone else. We had to get to know him on the fly, so to speak. So, but he was, he's a strapping dude, probably 200 plus pounds, probably like 6'2", chiseled face, good looking guy, like Marine, but he was Navy. And, but he was a little on the soft spoken side. I'm not saying he was a soft spoken dude, but I think it was a little more cerebral, when he spoke. And, but, we talked a little bit. He really befriended Darius Eichler because that was his roommate, and the corpsmen that were roommating, my roommate was Joe Milano, and him and I spent a ton of time together. So, and then sometimes after a period of time, your roommate is your running partner. Whenever you go someplace or do something, that's the guy you hang out with. So, but back to Bryan Earle, he was a little on the quiet side, but I think he was more focused on his task at hand, which is to marry his wife, his future wife.
And you got to meet her, didn't you?
We did. She came to the BAS for the very first time. And when she came to the BAS, of course, no one knew because in our BAS we shared it with religious petty officers and the chaplain. So she was coming up there for marriage counseling, talk to the chaplain, etc. So I'm sitting at my desk, and the door is closed in the BAS, so you really can't hear the noise in the hallway, etc. But I was working, and I smelled perfume, and I was like, "There's a girl in here." So as you know, we were on the fourth floor, and they had like balconies that looked down on the main lobby area, right? So I'm like, "There's a girl in here," and it just annoyed me. So I went outside to see if there was really perfume that I smelled. Now I'm on the fourth floor, and it got stronger. And I looked around, every rail on each floor, looking down to the lobby, was manned with Marines. I think every Marine had smelt it. And it was Micheline, which was Bryan Earle's future wife. So she finally came up to the BAS, and I remember her looking at me, and I was smiling. Matter of fact, her and I discussed this recently, and she was saying that, yeah, you're the only one smiling. And then she turned to her fiance Bryan. She says, "Who's that guy and why is he smiling?" He said, "I don't care." And he just shuffled her off to the chaplain's office. But that was my first exposure to Micheline at the time, the scent of a woman.
Yeah, compared to, I'm sure, how all you Marines and sailors were smelling in those days too. Perfume had to stand out pretty prominently, I think.
That's exactly it. Everyone was smelling musty. Half the Marines were probably day 3 of wearing their camis. We're the same camis. We were sweating like pigs all the time because it was extremely hot during the summertime. No air conditioning to speak of. So yeah, we had a particular scent. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about kind of like that lead up in October. What as we're kind of heading towards the bombing, like that last week or so, and really also that last day before the bombing.
Right. Well, I'm going to take it back to September, if you don't mind. The month of September was probably the hardest month for us because for 30 straight days they bombed us. And it was to the point that we were in our foxholes or in our battle stations for 30 days. And a lot of these guys, they couldn't move. I mean, they were using buckets to relieve themselves, and then they had to keep those buckets in those foxholes until the rocket fire was light enough for them to empty it, and that's how we were living for like the last 30 days. But prior to that, we had known that, prior to that September, we had received rocket fire. We've been hearing rocket fire at a distance perpetually the entire time we were there. And then for a short, brief period, a week or so, there was absolutely, positively no rocket fire. And we were saying to each other, they're loading up. And then we heard that the Israelis had left. And the Marines were really down about that. They were like, "Yo, man, the Marines, the Israelis left because they were protecting us." And it was all the buzz. And a lot of guys say, "Man, we're screwed," So bearing that in mind, we move into the month of September and we're being bombed every single day for 30 straight days. And casualties were coming in. And then, of course, the gunnery sergeants are yelling at us to be quiet because they wanted to hear the rocket fire coming in as if they could dodge it or something. It just got chaotic. Then, and then as that month proceeded, it moved into October. The rocket fire wasn't as frequent on our base, but they were still firing at us, and they were actually striking the building, so it was shaking the building on occasions. And then Miraculously, it stopped. It stopped in time enough, which I've really found really odd, because we were getting ready to leave, needless to say, and we were packing up, getting ready to leave. And then they decided we was going to have a USO show. And of course, we were saying, bring Bob Hope. But I think he was at the end of his career at that point. So they brought in another band, a country western band. I can't remember who they were. And they played for us. And it was great because they gave everybody 2 beers and pizza. And we was able to listen to the band. And they were bringing Marines in to sing on the mic, etc. And there was a particular gentleman, I'm going to put his name, Gunny. Gunny. There's Gunny Belmer and Gunny. He'll come back to me. I want to talk to you about him. But either way, he was a gunny from here in Charleston. He was in Johns Island. And he brought him up to the microphone to sing. And so everyone was really high that day on the, the festivities, the beer, the music, and we were getting ready to go home in 25 days. We can literally count those days. And so the next morning, the next day, or that night, I should say, morale was extremely high. Guys were talking, and we had our contraband whiskey, Johnny Walker Red, and it was flowing all over the place. We would get some of the Lebanese people to buy it for us, etc. But anyhow, and that night I had a buddy of mine, James Jones. He was another corpsman. He walked up to me, and I was in my room at the time, and I said, "Yo, man, what's going on? What you doing?" He said, "Man, I was just reading my Bible." And I said, "Bet, let me go ahead and say a prayer before I go to bed." So I said a prayer before I went to bed. And sure enough, we went to condition 1, the highest level of condition. So we all went down to our battle dressing station. And at that point, we already had 2 battle dressing stations, one on the 4th floor and one in the basement, because we were receiving so many casualties. It was easier to bring them down 1 floor than carry them up 4. So I found myself, I was in a nice cot, which is prime property during condition 1. And James Jones was right next to me. He was sleeping at the bed of the foot of the bed of the cot. So we stayed there and we watched the Marines just, usher their way in, cussing the whole way because it was like late at night. And then eventually we went back to condition 2, where we had to go back to our beds, but we had to keep our uniform on. And I said, I've been through this fire drill too many times. I'm going to stay right here in this cot because it's nice and comfortable. I'm not going anywhere. And sure enough, we went into condition 1 again that night. So my plan was correct. Just stay put. If you're comfortable, don't go back. Don't give up your property. So I went back, and the Marines came back down, and they were even more pissed because it was like 2 a.m, possibly. And then maybe by 3 a.m, they went back to condition 2, and they went back to their rooms, and I stayed right there. And around 6 o'clock in the morning, I woke up because I needed to use a bathroom. And I was like, oh man, the urinals are like way down the street around the corner. It was just a long walk. And it was Sunday, our only day off, and I wanted to sleep in late. So instead of getting up and go to use the bathroom, I just decided to stay in my cot a little bit longer. And then after a while, I dozed off to sleep, and then I was awakened by this huge roar. And then my face was getting pelted with rocks all of a sudden. And then I got hit in the eye, and I immediately turned over on the cot and covered my head. And we didn't wait. And at that point, I thought we had received a round on my side of the building, And so the Marines were, the few Marines that were there, after everything had settled, people started talking. And they were saying, what happened? What's going on? And I said, man, I think we got a round on our side of the building. And he was like, man, I don't know. And then this other Marine, he says, where am I? And I said, you're in the basement. Where were you? He said, I was on the 4th deck. And, it's pitch black dark here. You can't see anything. And my eyes, I had received injuries to both of my eyes at that point. And And I looked around to see if there was a way out, and it was just pitch black dark. And I took my t-shirt off at that point, and I put it on my face to stop the bleeding and so forth. And I prayed to God. I said, God, please get me out of here. Just get me out of here. And when I removed my t-shirt from my face, there was a beam of light that was coming from the ceiling. And I yelled to the other Marines, go to the light, go to the light. And I went to the light and I crawled up. And the first thing I did, I looked up to see which side of the building that round had hit. You know, I wanted to see it. And I looked up and I saw the clearest blue sky on the planet. And I was like, oh my God, the whole building was gone. And then I looked down and I realized I was standing on top of a hill and everything else was below me. And that's when I began to see the carnage and the Marines and rounds were cooking off, and they were saying that we were receiving rock sniper fire at the same time. And it was just a lot for a 21-year-old boy. And I'm going to emphasize boy, you know. But I was in my skivvies. I had no medical bag. My t-shirt was off, but I started administering aid the best way I could. And I remember receiving this one Marine, and he was lying down. His body's virtually pristine, but his face was covered in debris. And in our training, you know, triage, they say, save the ones you can save, and those you can't, you just have to let them go. And I thought he was one of those guys I had to let go. So I turned my back to him and started to proceed to help another Marine. And then I heard somebody throwing rocks at me. I'm like, who's throwing rocks? And I turned around and it was that same Marine whose face was covered with debris was trying to save himself, throwing rocks from his face. And I think I lost it at that point because I felt that I made the wrong decision. Anyway, so I turned my back to him to help another Marine, and it happened to be Sergeant Yubera, who used to be basically a groupie for the BAS, and he would always say, you know, Doc, I don't care what the Marines say about you. You're all right by me. So through all this carnage, I hear this real calm voice saying, help me, help me. And I look down this crater and I see this head protruding from, you know, he had a slab of concrete over him and the only thing it was showing was his head. So I slid down and I picked up the concrete and I pushed it off of him. And then I knelt down next to him and I said, Sergeant Yubera, it's me, Doc Howell. And he looked up at me. He said, Doc Howell. And I said, yeah. He said, what happened? I said, you know, I said, I don't know. I thought we took a round and I just didn't know. But I said, you know, the building's gone. And he said, man, get me out of here. And I looked at his leg and he had a rock of easily this size in the back of his thigh. And he was wrapped in rebar. And I was by myself at the point, and I was trying to remove that rock. And he said to me, Doc, am I going to lose my leg? And you know, we lie. We lie when we have to, you know. And there's just no way I thought that he was going to save that leg, because it was heavily embedded into his leg. He had more rock in his leg than he had flesh. So other Marines from the perimeter started coming in, and I told one of the Marines to give me his boot blouse so I can make a tourniquet around his leg, which I did. And then at that point, the Lebanese Red Cross started coming in, you know. And so a couple of Marines had picked him up, and they was carrying him to the ambulance. And at this point, my vision in my eye was getting worse. And my head was pounding. And I had, my face was still bleeding. And that's when a Red Cross worker came up to me, and, you know, he carried me off at that point. So that was, you know, that particular day, it was highly chaotic. And it was just a lot to digest. It was surreal. You know, there's just no way that you can digest all of that information and all of those optics and make sense of it. You just couldn't, you know. And it took me a couple of days to process it. But in the meantime, I was being shuffled off to the Italian peacekeeping hospital, and then to the university hospital, Beirut University Hospital, I believe it was. And then later on that night, they put us on a C-140, I guess, and flew us to Germany. And that's where I stayed for about the next 10 days. So.
Oh, Don, that's such an incredibly powerful story, man. It just gives me chills hearing it again from you. I want to back up a little bit, because you know you're in the basement of this building, right? And this whole 4-story building, really 5 if you count the basement, comes down on top of you, and you're kind of trapped in this pocket with the whole building on top of you. And when you can finally see, what does it look like underground? What does it smell like for people who are trying to envision what your experience was like?
The smell is probably one of the thing that jumps out of my mind foremost. It was very acrid first. It was my throat was burning when I was taking a breath. And at the same time, the air was so thick with dust, you know, you really couldn't take a breath, you know, and every breath you took was like dirt or acid, you know, and it could have been, and it was clearly, it was from the truck bomb itself, you know, the remnants from the truck bomb. You know, you just couldn't see anything around you. It was so thick, the smoke and the dust. You just couldn't even see. Matter of fact, I had some boots that was directly underneath my cot at the bomb, during the bomb blast. And because I knew I had nothing on my feet. And once I kind of gathered myself, I stood up. You know, as you know, I didn't use the bathroom when I intended to. So I stood up and I relieved myself. And then I reached for my boots, and they weren't even there. And I couldn't even see them. It was just so thick. But then when I told everyone to go to the light, that was the only thing that, you know, that we could see. And you know how it is when you go to a concert and they have like smoke, and then they use the laser beams and so forth, and you can really, the smoke, you know, makes the light stand out. That's what the situation was. It was like a beam from God. You know, you like when Moses asked God to, you know, shine the light on the burning tree or something to that effect. It was that type of effect, you know. So, but it was the atmosphere was just thick. You couldn't breathe. You know, if you did, your throat would burn. And it was really thick. It was hard to breathe.
And tell us a little bit too about climbing out, because you've got this beam of light. I mean, this like godlike beam that after you've prayed shines the path out of there. I mean, and I know that the ruins are kind of honeycombed in a lot of ways, but how much pushing aside dirt and digging and pulling are you to kind of climb your way to safety?
Well, that's the key thing. It was effortless. There was nothing in the way. It was basically just a slick slab. And I just climbed up that slick slab. And there was a couple of rocks and stuff that I can get my foothold on, you know? And it was effortless. But I tell you right now, James, that light was not there before. It was absolutely, positively not there before. I looked around because, you know, I'm desperate. I want to get the hell out of here, you know? And it wasn't there. And then I prayed, and boom, it was there. And at that point, it was easy to get out. And the funny part was that when I got to I think it was the Italian hospital or maybe one of the hospitals, they asked me where I was. And I said, I was in the basement. And then you can hear the surprise in their voice. It said basement. They didn't even know they had a basement. Then they went and told some other people who were working the rescue job to spread the word that there's a basement to look for, you know. So you can hear them scrambling out, you know, to start looking for a basement. So, but yeah, he was quite surprised to hear that I'd come from the basement. He didn't even know the basement. It was a basement in that building.
'Cause, that's kind of the miracle in so many ways of who survives and who doesn't, is because when the building came down, it doesn't come down in a total flat line. I mean, there are these pockets, and it's the miracle of where you are as to whether
Right.
you're going to have, like you are, in a safe pocket with an access out, or if you're going to be under a desk, or like Chaplain Wheeler, where two walls came together to create an A-frame that protected him. It's like there's just no rhyme nor reason to how it played out. And
I had a gentleman, because my cot at the time was in a corner, more or less. So I had a wall, it came to a corner, and that's where my cot was. But James Jones made it. From what I hear, I hadn't seen him since, but I heard that he'd made it. But there was another gentleman that was right next to me who didn't. And when I say right next to me, I'm talking about arm's length, who didn't. So yeah, there was, and that often went through my mind. There's no rhyme or reason who made it, who didn't, in what circumstances. I don't know if you're aware of it, but there's a guy, his name was Appleby, and he's from South Carolina, as a matter of fact. He was on the opposite side of the building that was facing MSSG, because the front side of the building was facing the airport. He was blown out of the building, up and around to the front of the building, lands on the shower tent, slides off, walks away.
yeah,
And he was on the other side of the building.
yeah. There are a couple of those crazy stories, like Burnham Matthews blown out of the third floor, blown clear of the wreckage, lands, rolls, and is okay. Pablo Arroyo, literally in the room next to him, blown out, buried under rubble. There's a guy on the rooftop, building comes down, he literally rides it all the way down, tumbles off, and lands in the driver's side of a Jeep. I mean, it's just, there's so many of these crazy stories, and it's just, there is, like we were saying, no rhyme nor reason when a building like that comes down.
Yeah. It was
how it defined.
Yeah. So, and it's difficult when I describe these things to people, I don't know if they're, as they process this information. Of course, these are civilians, people who just was curious. And sometimes I'll get into the details. Most of the time I don't. But on the few times that I did, you can just tell by the look on their face that they just did not understand what the hell you were talking about. They just couldn't make that connection, I guess. As far as they're concerned, it was probably just another TV show, by the way that they would process it. So, but yeah, it's been interesting over the years to carry that story. I mean, it's easier for me to talk about it nowadays than it was in earlier years, and I understand how a lot of veterans with PTSD don't discuss the Vietnam War or so forth, and you hear those stories all the time, and now I can relate. So,
at what point do you start hearing more about what actually happened that day? Is that that there was a truck bomb, and that there are this many casualties, or that the rescue efforts have turned to recovery efforts? And when do you start learning about what happened?
I began to learn, because that's a good point, because for a day or two plus, I didn't know what was going on. I think I began to hear what was going on once I was in the hospital in Germany, and I'd probably already been there at least 2 days. And then that's when we was beginning to see hear the news reports, because they have television, needless to say, in the bedrooms. So we was able to watch it on television, and we was able to get the full scope of it. But up until the time that I was literally flown to Frankfurt, Germany, and put in the hospital, I had absolutely no idea what had happened. If it were just a rocket or a truck bomb or a car bomb, I had no idea.
Don, you were telling us when we were researching the book about that medevac flight. And at this point, they've loaded you on. Of course, anybody who's seen a medevac flight, they stack them, through or high, and but they've covered your eyes, so you can't really see anything, but you can hear what's going on. Tell us about that flight out that day.
When they of course they flew us in. I mean, they loaded us onto the boat or onto the plane, and uh, the dentist, Doctor, not
Either
Doctor Bigelow,
Bigelow, yeah.
Doctor Ware said he'd spoken to me. This is recently when I spoke to him. He had actually was one of the people who put me on the plane, and he had spoken to me. And I guess I responded back to him, but I really don't remember it. But I know Dr. Ware very well because, needless to say, all the dental and religious personnel was all in our same space. Anyway, I'm on the plane, and at this time, both of my eyes are bandaged. So I wasn't able to see much, but I just felt, and at that time it's October, so at night it was very cold. It was getting really cold, and I had no uniform. All I had was my skivvies. That was it, just my underwear. So I remember being carried on the stretcher and feeling really cold outside, and not really talking, just experiencing, and just listening to, what people are saying. Carry him, put him over here, or lift him up, and so forth. And then I remember. They got us settled in on the plane, and it was a lot of ruckus, people moving around, the medical staff talking and giving orders to each other, barking off orders, depending upon what patient they had and the casualty, the level of injury that they received and where to put them. So I was hearing all these noises and all these voices and so forth. And then I heard the door or the tail of the plane close. You hear the hydraulics pulling into the plane, closing the door. And I'm hearing the turbines, wind up and, getting ready to take off and so forth. And I'm just listening to all this and, I'm rumbling, everyone else is rumbling, the plane tilts and it becomes airborne. And we begin to level off. And once we leveled off, that's when the nurses and the medical staff went to work. And I heard beeping sounds from a EKG machine, beep, beep, beep. And I also heard beeping sounds from, blood pressure cuffs, because they had automatic blood pressure cuffs. You hear them inflating and deflating. And then I heard, we're losing him. And then, because I had a nurse that was sitting next to me and she was talking to me, and then she rushed away. And I guess one of the Marines had coded and they were trying to save his life. And you just heard, and me being a nurse and being in many codes, those life-saving efforts, you just know the sounds. And you can just tell that they were really working on this guy. They were just trying hard to bring him back. And then you hear that relaxed tone when you know that they've done all they could and they just had to let him go. And that was when the nurse returned back to my side. And she was just, talking to me because I told him, hey, my bottom of my feet are hurting and stuff like that. And she looked at the bottom of my feet and I had some blisters from burns and stuff like that. So she took care of those little things. And then we arrived in Frankfurt, Germany, where it was really cold. And they were transporting us from the plane inside the hospital, and it was extremely cold then. And I remember I had a ring on my finger that I bought in Turkey because it was the only time I go to have liberty. And I had real small fingers, so buying a ring for my hand was really rare. So when I found a ring that actually fit, I took it. And I remember this guy, I don't know who he was, he starts tugging at my ring. It was a gold ring, needless to say. He starts tugging at my ring, and I just snatched my fist back. So, but yeah, then eventually they settled us down in the rooms, and I didn't get to see where my surroundings was until the next day. And that's when they removed the bandage on my left eye. But they kept the bandage on my right eye, because clearly the damage there was significant.
And you're still blind in that eye today.
I'm still blind in that eye till today. Right. As a matter of fact, I had cataract surgery on that eye for the first time 2 years ago. And the doctor who did it, was supposed to be one of the best in town. He was very optimistic because I went in, I had the surgery done, and I had to go back the very next day. And what they do is they check the pressures in your eye. And mine was like through the roof. So they literally took a needle and they put it in the white of my eye to get out. This is all from Beirut. Thank you very much. He literally took a needle and he put it in the white part of my eye, and I saw the fluid just coming out of that needle, just like a curtain coming over my eye, And but they did the surgery because I still have a little bit of peripheral vision, so they wanted to save that. And the doctor was saying to me, he said, man, it took a long time for us to do your eye because not only did they have to replace the lens, but he had to detach my iris because it had been dislodged because of the bomb blast. And it was stuck to the lens of my eye. So he had to detach that, and then he tried to sew it back to make my pupil look round again. And but he thought that after all those efforts, I would receive my vision back. And he told me, he said, man, yeah, I was kind of hoping you get your vision back. I said wishful thinking. But I was blessed to have people around me that really tried. So, but even after that surgery, I'm still blind in my right eye. So yeah, but keeping that peripheral vision is really good for when I ride my motorcycle, changing lanes.
and you're mountain biking too, right? You gotta keep an eye out on that. So, yeah.
I know. I was wondering about that when we first met, about the biking. About riding, both mountain biking, but really on the motorcycle. But, what was the time in Germany like? So you said you were there. It was 10 days you were there.
Oh man, so I went to the Germany, and they received us really well. I was in the room with I think his name is Sergeant Arroyo. I think that was his name. He was with Recon. Anyway, him and I were sharing the room together. It was a 4-man room. And then we had more flowers than you can ever imagine. The local elementary school had written pictures or drawn pictures and stuff. So we had, pictures of them, of their work around and everything else. And the charge nurse, or the nurse that came to work with me, was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen in my life. So needless to say, at the age of 21, I fell in love with her. But it was a good experience because the Army personnel came and visited us on a regular basis. And because I was there for 10 days. So near the end of my stay there, evidently I was good enough to walk around. They allowed me to go to a club, the E Club, the enlisted club there. So I had no clothes, but they brought clothes. I guess they've donated clothes for me, and I put the clothes on and I went to the club. And even there at the club, they were just shaking my hand and, supporting me. They knew who I was. So that was good.
Yeah. Gosh, what was it like to walk into the club after everything you had gone through? And then at one point you get a visit from General Kelly.
Yeah. I think within the first 2 days that I was there, General Kelly came. I was still very much in bed and still reeling from all that had happened. And I, to be honest with you, I think they took off my bandage so I could see him on my left eye. So when he came, I was able to look at him, and if you look at that photo that James was kind enough to show me, I was looking down when he gave me my Purple Heart. And it wasn't, I was looking down to look at the Purple Heart. I was looking down because of the pain. Because, when they took the bandage off my left eye, I was able to look around, but your right eye moves the same way, So it was really painful for me to see. So I just basically just kept my eyes down. So it wasn't because I was looking at the Purple Heart, it's just because it was for comfort reasons that I was looking down. But anyhow, General Kelly came, and then as days went on, my eyes were feeling a little bit better. So when we finally got to go to the club, it was really great because, I was able to have a beer, and the Army guys were around me wanting to take pictures. And, I didn't buy a single drink. Not that I drank a lot. I think I had maybe 2 or 3 drinks, but that was a lot, especially if you hadn't drank in like 6 months. And but the reception was really warm, and even the DJ had made an announcement, as to who I was, So I really thank the Army soldiers at Frankfurt. They were really very accommodating, very, very accommodating. But needless to say, all I wanted to do is get a girl, hang out with one of the girls.
And then what was it like leaving Germany, coming home, everything that went along with that, and then going back to work for the first time? And how did that experience impact you then? And then how has that morphed over all this time?
Well, when I left Germany, they flew us back to the States, and I think it was a medevac flight, but I was able to sit up during the entire flight. And once we got to Bethesda, they showed me to my room, and I stayed there for about 30 days. At that point, they had a slew of appointments waiting for me. Of course, I had to go see my eye doctor. I had to go see psychiatrists and dental, the whole nine, and I had to get another physical. So it was really busy at that time, and I was still a little exhausted with my injuries. I mean, I don't know if I was mentally exhausted or physically exhausted, but I was just tired. And but there was other Marines that was in my room with their family members and their mothers and so forth. That was there, wheeling them off to their appointments and so forth. But after about 30 days, then they discharged me and allowed me to go home for like a week or two. And then I came back, and they put me in the front office at the reception desk, I would guess we would say, in Bethesda. So I was working that office for a while. And it was funny because I'm working this desk. It was late at about 7 o'clock at night, I would say about 7 o'clock at night. And who walks in there but Casper Weinberger? He walks right up, and I'm talking to him because and he came there for medical. I guess if you're a congressman or something, you get free care, which was not true, but but he, but he came in there for his free care. And he's a real short dude, a real short dude, And I was just looking at it, and I was like, you're a real short dude, But I didn't, at that point, I wasn't aware on how integral his position was to where we were and how we ended up. But he did look at my Purple Heart and said nothing. And looking back, to answer your question, Jack, looking back, I thought that was kind of jacked up, because he could have at least said, hey, thanks for your work out there, or something to that effect. Because here I am, 21 years old with a Purple Heart, that doesn't compute. So he had to have known who I was. And I mean, after all, my commanding officer did and so forth. So anyway, fast forward to nowadays, those experiences still stick in my mind. I still think about the time when I was in Beirut. I still think about the time when I was in Germany. And I'm really so grateful to the people, to the staff there in Frankfurt, Germany hospital. And I'm beginning to find people that were of that era, in that time, nowadays. Micheline was one of those people.
I was going to say, you were, when Jack and I were with you at the 40th reunion, it was you and Darius who and a couple other guys were like, whatever happened to Bryan Earle's Lebanese wife? You guys have got to find her. You've got to find her. And you set Jack and I off on a mission to find her. And we did. We fortunately did, and found out that she is actually, because of her marriage to Bryan, she ultimately married him 6 days before the bomb blast. He's killed in the blast, but she is able to come to the U.S. Reagan eventually has to help in Congress to get her citizenship, and then she had her own very difficult path to get here. And tell us about her, and because you're instrumental in us hunting her down and everything.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you. It took us 40 years to find her, and you found her in 2 days. So thank you very much.
We had to confirm the story. First, we thought it might have been an urban legend of some sort, because it had this kind of aura and mystique to it, and a couple of things just didn't quite add up. And of course, James, being the historian, is like, well, we have to find documentation and have to make sure and all this stuff. And so yeah, it was what an incredible story.
And I can't thank you enough for the effort you put forth, man, because now, I talk to her on a regular basis. She's a sister. She's my sister, We went to visit her. I went to go visit her about 2 months ago in Ohio for the very first.
A little bit about her backstory, and about what she's been through. Yeah, for listeners. So yeah.
Okay. So needless to say, well, not needless to say, she was. This is a little bit has to do with what I know, and this has a little bit has to do with after talking to her. So she left Beirut, and I'm talking to her about her experience with Bryan and so forth. She at the time of the bombing, the day of the bombing, I guess she heard about it, or she heard of it, or felt it, because it rocked the whole city. She comes, her and her mother, I think, makes a beeline to the barracks, and she's seeing all this carnage. And I'm talking to her. She's telling me all this stuff, and she just couldn't believe that her husband was in there. She couldn't believe that he was dead. And the Marines would not allow her to move past a particular checkpoint, because you want to limit the people that are in and out of that space. But eventually they got a call from either, I don't know if it was Gerlach or somebody up top, allowed her to pass. So she came through, and she was telling me that she was told that day that Bryan was found and that he didn't survive. And she still was not believing this. So, and she's a real fiery girl, lady. I mean, she doesn't take no for an answer. She is a true Titan. She's a true Titan. So, eventually she came to grips with the fact that he had passed, and her mother had told her that she had to let Bryan go back to his family in Ohio. And she didn't really want to do that because it was her husband. She wanted to bury him in Lebanon with her. She can visit him. But she was kind enough to do that. And by her account, which I know it's true, she came, and her brother escorted her here. And I guess she met Bryan's family. And she was saying that the relationship between the two of them deteriorated quite quickly, because they blamed her for his return to Beirut to marry her. So she was saying that at her early age, because she was still under 20, she was left alone. The family had completely excommunicated her.
And she couldn't go back either, because then she couldn't have gotten back in the country. Bryan's goal was, he wanted her out of Lebanon. he wanted her safe in America and out of harm's way. And so she comes back to bury him, but she can't leave again.
Right.
The U.S. government says if you leave, you can't get back in. You got this temporary visa.
Mhm.
And it becomes this years-long battle for Congress to write the legislation to eventually grant her citizenship, because she should have had it automatically. She's married to an American, but it was a loophole.
Yeah,
And
yeah. I never understood that either.
his paperwork hadn't quite been processed, even though the embassy had facilitated their wedding and all. He died with the paperwork unsigned on his body.
See,
And so
yeah,
Congress had to write that special law for her to be a citizen. And Reagan did sign it in 1987, I believe, or 86.
and
So,
she said she has several letters from Reagan, she says, that he written her personally. And at the beginning, she was saying that, she thought that the letters were fake, and then a friend of hers was reading it. She said, hey, this is real ink. This is his real signature. So, but moving forward, so she was left to her own device, and make a living for herself. So she immersed herself into leatherworks. So now she has made a wildly successful business making children's boots and leather shoes and women's purses. And so she's really on top of the world, financially, which is one of the things we are more concerned about, because, people in her situation can become destitute in little to no time if they don't have support, But she was able to battle through all of that. And she finally got married, I guess, a little over 20 years ago. She said it took a long time for her to get married. And she ended up marrying a guy who's also quite wealthy. She lives in a family home of this gentleman that was built in the 1800s. So she's living quite comfortably, and but she's beautiful. She's super smart. Oh my God! You talk to her for 5 minutes, this girl knows what she's talking about. She's just smart. And so we talked on the phone quite a bit, and I visit her every now and again. I just saw her last week.
Tell us about the first time you saw her. Go and you went to visit her.
Wow. But the first time I saw her, this is what she told me. During my last visit with her, because I went to her trade show in Atlanta. So she said to me that she saw me when she came into the barracks for the first time. With the Sense of the Woman story. She saw me that day, and she said she recognized my smile. Because she made a comment to her husband, why is he smiling? No one else is smiling. So when she saw me for the very first time, 40 plus years later, when I visited her in Ohio, she said she recognized me immediately because of my smile. And evidently, while she's in Beirut, there was like 2 or 3 occasions that she saw me smiling.
You do have a great smile, Don. I will give you that.
Well, it's something she definitely remembered, and that's when she saw me. She immediately knew who I was, and we just picked up like it was yesterday. We went through the hard conversation first. The tear-jerking moments that she had to endure. Having to realize that her husband was actually dead, and knowing all that they had gone through just to be together. I guess there was one occasion that Bryan Earle and her was allowed out in town to get their tuxedos and their wedding dresses and all that other stuff. So they get into a taxi, and a taxi is like a limousine service there. So it was a private taxi. They get into the taxi, and then there's this Lebanese guy that barges in and sits down next to her in the back seat and speaks in perfect Arabic. If you marry this man, you're going to be a widow. And then he leaves the vehicle. And these are the things that she's going through. And, she's still under the age of 20. So that's a lot. It's a lot. So she was telling me this story, and she said how her and Bryan had looked at each other and were laughing on how they escaped death. With this guy and all the bombings. And needless to say, she was saying that just in her neighborhood alone, with the Israelis that had come through the years before, all that they had gone through, because there was just a lot of barbarism that was going on, and just the military strong arming that was going on to Lebanese people there. So she was saying at the age of 6, she was just staring out her window at one point, and she saw this old man who used to pass out blankets to people who were cold in the wintertime. He did it every year. The Israeli just came up to him, started jerking him around and shot him. So she was exposed to all that all her life. So when her and Bryan got together and they were finally, moments away from getting married, they looked at each other and just laughed to say, yeah, we beat him, we escaped the death, Little did she know that death was just waiting on her right around the corner, So, now that she's, in her 50s and she's able to look at this thing holistically, she's still amazed that all that had went on and as much as she has accomplished after all the adversity she had gone through. She's a tough woman. She could have been an excellent Marine or soldier or something like that. She is just tough as nails,
She's lovely. She really is.
Gorgeous at that. So I my hats off to her. I'm just so happy for her.
Well, I love the pictures you sent us when you met with her in Ohio, and then last weekend when you saw her in Atlanta. I mean, I love that. This is the positive story out of the tragedy of Beirut.
Yeah, it is, and I agree with that. It was a lot that we had gone through, and maybe it was years and years, 40 years before we was able to see a little more of the positive. But looking back at it, it's so well worth it. Meeting her, meeting you guys, and getting the story out, and the emotions that we all share together, and like her, like myself and her, for many years we didn't discuss it with anybody because we felt that no one would understand us. We felt like that outlier, and what she explained to me, when she explained that to me, I knew exactly where she was coming from. And I told her after our first initial meeting, because we spoke for like 5 hours, that she's going to feel so much better because she actually had somebody that she can just, talk to, who was there and part of her family. And sure enough, she is so much better for it. And I'm happy for that, So, but, yeah, she's doing really well now. And, 2 girls. Matter of fact, her daughter just got married about a week or 2 ago. Her oldest daughter.
It's wonderful. Yeah, that's great.
Right there in that beautiful yard of hers. So, yeah.
What do you hope people take from your experience there? Someone's to read this story, to listen to you on this podcast. What do you hope people take from that, or more broadly, take from the American experience in Beirut? What happened there?
The first thing I would like for the people to understand is the humanity of the Marines that were there. Sure, they're in uniform, sure, they're combatants, but we were in that particular instant, we were peacekeepers. But these are just regular guys that talked about sports. At that age, all we talked about was girlfriends and wives and kids and cars. What car are we going to buy? I saved up some money. I'm getting me a Camaro. And then, needless to say, when we get back, we spent a lot of time talking about when we get back, man, me and you, we're going to go and hang out. I'm going to introduce you to my mom and my dad. And this, because you build such a camaraderie when you're in a situation like that. And I think that people, and not that I expect them to know these things, but I think people miss, the bond that's made between these men. and how lasting it would be if we had all survived. And we'd already, and I guess even then we knew how important it was, or how important our meeting was, and how it would play out in the future. We knew we were going to be those World War II vets in wheelchairs, still talking war stories, and these guys, they don't spend a whole lot of time talking about the battles and the bullets and so forth. We talk about the good times and the laughs and the booze that we snuck in and things like that. And I'd like for the people to understand that, these men went into this situation with every intention of holding up their duty as a patriot, as a Marine, despite the corner we were put in. A lot of times it was mentioned, you mentioned in the book, that we were in a fishbowl. And we literally were, we were taking pot shots all the time. And the anguish that these gentlemen had gone through, the letters that they wrote, all around the same time, they were all writing at home, "Mom, I don't think I'm going to make it." We were all singing that, and we were all writing that in unison, because the progression was deteriorating in that fashion. And of course, if you can take a picture, if you can look at a picture of these guys and any of them are smiling, remember those smiles, because that's who they really are. Sure, they'll fight for the country and they lay their lives down for the country, which they have. But these are great dudes, just great, great, great guys. So, moving forward, here we are 40 plus years later. Some of us are broken. Some of us are much older, and some of us, are, we've lost quite a few, over the years. I hope that we're not forgotten, because that's one of the main things that we all talked about over the years. Said, man, nobody knows who we are, what we did. Nobody. And if it wasn't for you, James, and Jack, and and all the other people who want to bring this story to the forefront, I don't think we would have had an opportunity like this. So I want to thank you for making us relevant. Absolutely. So, but that's what I would hope the readers, above all, just understand the humanity of these gentlemen. They're dudes that were doing their jobs, that they fought for what they believed in, and they were motivated. Nothing was going to stop them. And sometimes the spoils of war gets the best of us.
Don, thank you, man. I'll tell you, Jack and I from the very beginning of this project talked about how our goal was to get you guys. This is your story. It's not ours. It's your story. And we wanted to present your story along with everybody else's. And that's the whole idea behind the podcast, the book, everything, is to let you tell that story. And it's been a privilege and an honor for us to get to know you, to hear your stories, to share your stories. Thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you. Thank you. Without you guys, I mean, we would still be forgotten. I mean, even on our wall, it mentions, forgotten, and or never to be forgotten. And it's a hard push to keep us relevant. And you guys are so pivotal in that. And thank you. Oh, both of you guys a beer.
I know, beers are definitely on me. And thank you for sharing this story, and lending everything you have to this, and your service, of course, to our nation, what you did down there, what you've done in these intervening years. And sincerely appreciate you sharing this, and get to know you has been a true pleasure and honor. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. All right.
Thank you for tuning in to the Danger Close podcast. Be sure and pre-order your copy of Targeted Beirut, the 1983 Marine barracks bombing and the untold origin story of the War on Terror. You can pre-order wherever books are sold. You can find me at Jack Carr USA on the social channels. OfficialJackCarr.com is the website. Click on shop in the upper right-hand corner for the merch. And if you got something out of this conversation, be sure to like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and leave a 5-star rating and review wherever you get your podcasts. Until the next time, take care out there. Stay safe. Be strong. keep fighting.